all you have is what you're listening to. So taking the show notes out and all those different things, it's just voice. And so how do you capture that voice in a way that sounds like you're part of that conversation, like they're right next to you? That's what I think about all the time when I'm working with all the other hosts on our podcast.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams. There's over 1.9 million podcasts. Most of them never see the results they expected. They want to monetize, but their show ends up costing them money, and they never achieve the listenership they desire. This show will help you launch, grow, monetize, and inspire with your podcast. Get ready to take notes, because here's your host, Adam Adams.
Welcome back to The Pop, the podcast on podcasting. I'm your host, Adam AAA Adams, and I've got Erin Clark on the show. We're going to be talking a lot about how you can really grow your show, what you have to have in place in the beginning, some lessons learned. And I'm really excited to jump into this because I know it's going to be valuable for you in your growth to be able to have a better show. I already know ahead of time that there's a couple of the pieces of advice that Erin's going to be talking about that really is specific for any podcaster. I know a lot of you podcasters who've had a show for a really long time and you're not doing this right. So you really want to listen in to make sure to change that because your podcast is not sounding good. It's not going out to the right people. You're not knowing what content to have. So going through this with Erin's really going to help you to be a bit better podcaster. So with that said, Erin is the host of the 15 Minutes of Wellness podcast. Well, she's the co-host of that and the producer of that. She also produces another podcast from the same organization. It's called New Home Stars Real Estate Rockstars. And a long name, but you got to plug it in the entire way, she says, because if you just plug in half of that name, you'll probably get a different podcast. So you don't want the wrong podcast. You want the right one. So if you plug it in, go back, rewind, and plug it in just like that. Erin, welcome to the show. And I'm really excited to have you. I want to start off here with the 15 Minutes of Wellness podcast that you co-host. And you were kind of like one of the masterminds to co-create it as well. Who does that podcast really truly serve? And how do you in your business serve that person?
Thank you, Adam. That's a great question. So the 15 Minutes of Wellness podcast, that podcast is really geared towards anyone who is looking to be involved in new home sales as a career. And how do you practice personal wellness in that journey of your career? And so that's really what we had in mind when we created this podcast. And I have to give all the credit to my co-host. She had the initial idea and I joined her as she was starting it and we took it and ran with it. So that's part of the answer to your question. Now, the other question is, who do we serve ultimately? I mean, the organization for whom I do these podcasts is a new home sales solution for home builders across the US. And so we operate in a lot of different markets. And so we're looking to reach people. They don't even have to be in the US. And actually, we found that a number of listeners aren't in the US, people who really want to be well and in all the different aspects of what that means. And how does that play into being a real estate professional?
I was wondering because I've got a lot of listeners that, to me, I never really worried about getting great guests for my show. I never really concerned about it, but I know your show, you have guests. It's more of an interview style podcast. And since we just have so many newer podcasters that kind of almost freak out, it's something that seems to really hold people back. I would do a podcast just fine. I could interview people just fine, but how do I get great guests? So what have you found to be kind of beneficial for you to find the right guest for your show?
Another great question. So getting great guests for the show, we're very fortunate in that I mentioned before that the New Home Star as a company spans across the US. And so we have a very wide reach in terms of not only people within our organization, but as well as the connections we have outside of it in the industry and outside of it as well. And so really what's been the biggest benefit is networking. And I know that's a scary word for a lot of people, especially if you're first starting out in podcasting. I know that's certainly a fear that I had to work to overcome. And really, the biggest thing is just talk to people. It could be the person that's checking you out at the grocery store if, in the pandemic, you know, if you're checking out groceries in person, right? Just talk to people and with the lens of who are you trying to reach with your podcast? And is there a message that the person you're talking to could share? And so what we did when we first started was reach out to people within our organization that we knew had experience outside of new home sales that was in some way, shape, or form geared towards the wellness topics we are looking to incorporate within the podcast. So that would be my biggest advice. Just network, talk with as many people as possible. Don't be afraid of rejection because it's a part of the process and it's okay. We all hear no all the time when it comes to getting guests. So don't be afraid. Just go for it. And then next thing you know, you're going to be getting yeses from people you never dreamed that you'd be getting yeses from.
Good stuff. My takeaway is for the most part that it's something that you're constantly part of. Like in the past, I hosted another podcast that I sold. It was called Creative Real Estate. So we've got the real estate thing in common, by the way, Erin. But I sold this podcast. And I had a lot of people on that were talking about how they raise more private equity, private money for some of the deals that they do or how they find deals. And they said a similar thing to what you said as it kind of relates to podcasting. They said that they basically just always tell everybody what they're doing. Like if you're always letting people know that you're in the real estate industry and that you borrow private capital to close on some deals and share the wealth with other people, then more people know how to find you. If you're always telling people that you're looking for deals, you're more likely to get it. I think that's partially the secret, if you've heard of the secret. But the point is, like for you and getting good guests, one of the main things that you're doing is you're not losing an opportunity to discuss the podcast with people. You even mentioned perhaps talking to people at the supermarket and just kind of always being open-minded to having people on and striking up that conversation in a natural way is a helpful way to kind of see if it's geared towards saying, hey, would you like to come on the show? And that makes it kind of simple. Like it makes it sound like, if this is part of what you're going to be doing, you want to start talking about it a little bit more. So I really like that. I have another several questions queued up, and I think they just get better and better. So for the listener, just keep listening. I think this is going to get good. So Erin, what is the biggest challenge that you're currently facing with podcasting in general?
The biggest challenge that I'm facing with podcasting, I would say, is getting buy-in, really. Because my podcasting, it's not independent. It's not just me producing, right? It's representing an organization. And in order for the podcast to grow, there needs to be buy-in from the right people within the organization to give the thumbs up to grow. And that could be anything from, making sure everyone has the same equipment. And, for example, I'm using an XLR microphone and 3 other people are using a USB. So the audio quality is going to be different. That's just one example of it. So making sure that I'm getting the buy-in from the decision makers is probably the biggest hurdle. And part of that is essentially proving ourselves through the podcast and saying, look, here's what we're finding. Here are the people listening. And if we can start to put metrics on how is this beneficial and communicate that value, we all know it as podcasters. Podcasting is a phenomenal opportunity for so many different reasons. So being able to build the business case is what I've been working on really over the past year. And I anticipate it's going to be something I'm working on for at least another year, if not longer.
Great stuff. That is perfect segue to what I was really wanting to ask you. You mentioned XLR mic. You mentioned a USB mic. Really what I wanted to find out is why would audio quality be important as a podcaster? But I'd love you to dive into what's the difference between XLR, USB, what does that mean? And why have you chosen to go with the XLR? Why is audio quality so freaking important when it comes to podcasting versus maybe a YouTube channel?
Absolutely. I love this question. I could talk about it forever. So really the difference between an XLR microphone and a USB. With an XLR microphone, you see them all the time when you see people singing in concerts or, those kind of professional settings. You're seeing almost every single time an XLR. And what you have to do to be able to edit it is you hook it up to what's called an interface, right? There's a separate instrument that you're using that takes the raw audio that's going through the microphone and turns it into something electronic. And that creates really the purest sound you can get. Whereas with a USB microphone, I'm not going to name any names, but there are some very popular ones that a lot of new podcasters like to use. A USB microphone actually takes that audio and does the exact same thing as an interface, but inside the microphone. And I know I'm simplifying this a lot. And for all of you audio engineers out there, please correct me if I'm wrong. But that, in a nutshell, is my understanding of what the difference is. And what happens then with the USB audio is that it's going into whatever, processor, like editor that you're using. It's going in a lesser form than really what you get for an XLR. So I like to use the example of, especially in real estate, because this is really applicable. When you're going to take pictures of a home that you want to sell, if I were to give you this 10-year-old digital camera and say, go take a picture and you can use that to post your listing, who's going to buy the house, right? It's a janky camera. The quality's awful. You can't do anything with it. And you're not a professional photographer, most likely. And so the likelihood of someone buying that home versus if you got a professional photographer out who has all the right equipment and knows the angles to take, like that's going to be the difference in your audio quality in a nutshell. And people hear that, they notice that difference. And so that for me is really why audio quality is so important, because with a podcast, all you have is what you're listening to, right? So taking the show notes out and all those different things, it's just voice. And so how do you capture that voice in a way that sounds like you're part of that conversation, like they're right next to you? That's what I think about all the time when I'm working with all the other hosts on our podcast.
Yeah. So for me, I prefer professional microphones when you're doing YouTube to actually have a microphone set up. You don't hear all the reverb, the whole room, it's not echoing. And so I prefer it anyway, just to have at least a nice microphone where you're really only hearing the voice. But just to kind of take that a step further when it comes to podcasting, it's already preferable when you are visually seeing it and hearing it. But when all you're doing is hearing it, having that echoey, unfiltered, raw sound, which, to me, by the way, Erin, I don't know if you see this or if you're part of these groups as well, but I'm a part of a few different podcasting groups like on Facebook. So you see people being like so proud that they're using like crappy mics and that they don't edit, they don't filter. And I will just say before we move on to the next question, that all of those people that are proud of themselves for having shitty quality, all of them seem to have no listeners. Every single one is like, oh no, my listeners like it raw. My listeners don't want me to edit it. My listeners don't want me to have a microphone. And it seems like it's like 40% of the podcasters out there putting out this really crappy quality through not even having a microphone, and then they're proud of it, but then when you go and listen to the show they have like no listeners. So you can tell that this really is critical, what Erin's talking about, where having a good quality microphone, a good quality sound, it is distracting and it's off-putting to the listener. There's a lot of parts to the audio quality, but just to kind of shorten up the answer here, having good quality on podcast is more critical than on a YouTube or something else. So very, very important. I'm glad we brought that up. Erin, I want to ask you, as far as like content, because as I understand it, as part of the company that you work for, you're putting out a lot of the training material, you're putting a lot of the content out for you and your co-host as well for the 15 minutes of wellness podcast. You help with the content, scheduling out content. What is most important when doing a podcast? Because I hear arguments all the time. Some people say to do a healthy balance between the two. Some people say that everything definitely needs to be evergreen because you're going to have somebody listening to the same episode like 10, 12, 6 years later. And then others are claiming that everything needs to be timely, like as if it was on a radio station and it was being broadcast live only. So what are your thoughts when scheduling content between just the two things, evergreen, I guess, hybrid or timely episodes?
I would say hybrid. That being said, the caveat to this is that it depends so much on what is it you're going for. right? For both of our episodes, we really need a mixture of both because we are interview based, but we're also in a very fast paced industry. And so we want to make sure that that content is something people can listen to over and over again. But we also recognize and learned last year when the pandemic started that people were looking for something right now that was relevant to their situation. And if we had stuck with our evergreen plan the entire year, no one would want to listen to it, right? So for us, the hybrid and having that flexibility is really helpful. I know that there's a lot of comfort in having evergreen content because you could plan out if you wanted to the entire year. I'm not suggesting you do that, but there is a lot of comfort there for a lot of newer podcasters, right? However, if you like to do things a little bit more quickly and you have to be a little bit more agile and nimble, I think for some other people, doing really timely, like not evergreen, just do like whatever you want to do and schedule it really, not too far out can be effective as well. So it really depends on what kind of podcast are you doing, who's your audience, what kind of content would you go for? And what I would say is listen to podcasts and figure out what are your like idols, right? Who is it that you're trying to sound like and be like in your podcast to start out and start to follow that example for a little bit and see what works best for you. Try it out, try a hybrid system, determine what works best for you and what are your listeners enjoying the most. And that'll help you determine, you know, more timely or more evergreen or a combination of both.
I really like that feedback. So on Wednesdays, today is Wednesday for the people recording. On Wednesdays are the days that I do all of my recording. So I'll have like an episode at 8:15 and then 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, and just kind of do back to back about usually 6 episodes a day. And just kind of on the point that you made about doing hybrid. Number one, I know at the beginning of the pandemic that a really well-known podcaster who's far into the, 10 times better than just the top 1% of podcasts. He got a lot of flack because his episodes are normally scheduled out for about 6 weeks ahead of time. And so in the first like 2 weeks of the pandemic, and things were kind of shaky, things were kind of confusing. And this was a real estate podcast, by the way. He got a lot of people commenting that said, I'm never going to listen to your podcast again because everything that you're talking about is old. Everything that you're talking about is like pre-pandemic, and this isn't useful or valuable to me anymore. So it does make sense that you would want to have a hybrid. And for my 8:15 episode that I was recording this morning, the woman, a good friend of mine, actually, she started saying, oh, okay, this week I'm going to be posting these things. She goes, good question, Adam. And actually this week, they can follow me on social media. They can look at all of this stuff that I'm dropping about that question that you're asking. And I just go, stop, cut, to whoever's editing this podcast, cut everything that she just said out. And I said to her, I go, Lisa, none of this is to be rude, but like, I can't have you saying that I'm posting this on my Facebook this week. I don't know when this episode's going to be out. I don't know when it's going to be. It could be 3 years, 6 years, 10 years from now that they're actually listening to it. And like, that's no longer relevant. So in that case, I wanted her to talk more about things that were more evergreen, things that it wasn't like, all right, hurry and do this thing for a week. And same thing when I have people on my podcasts and they have events maybe coming up or a webinar coming up. They're like, hey, on March 13th, I've got a webinar. And I'm like, cut. Like, I don't need to know what on March 13th of 2017, there was something when I have a listener listening in 2022 and it's 5 years different. It's not going to be helpful anymore. So let's just cut that stuff out. So I like the hybrid version as well. Cut a lot of those things out. I don't think you want your listener to feel like they're missing out when they listen to your podcast, but you hit it on the head. There are things happening like where all of a sudden there's new laws coming into place for podcasters or for real estate agents or real estate investors or developers, or the 1031 exchange might change or whatever. That's something where it's like, hey, this is new and noteworthy. Let's pull it out so the guest understands this is the new way to go. Anyway, I just think that how you described it was really perfect, that a hybrid really is the best way. And it really does depend, like you said, Erin, on like your industry. Technology, podcasts change all the time. So if all of a sudden you couldn't podcast anymore on certain platforms, we would need to bring that out on a podcast like this. We would need our audience to know that on more of a timely basis. The next one is just why even schedule content? Why is it important? And maybe even if you wouldn't mind, if you do feel like it's important to schedule out some content, maybe share some tips and tricks to being a little bit better at it. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, growyourshow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show.
Absolutely. So yes, and yes, always schedule. That being said, be flexible with how is it that you're scheduling. I know for me, if I could, I would schedule my entire year out. And in fact, I do try to. I learned over the past year, which was really kind of my first step into podcasting and doing other sorts of production for training, is that I need to be flexible. And again, the pandemic had everything to do with this, is that I scheduled 3 months out in some cases for a lot of topics, which felt really comfortable for me because I knew, oh, I'm set. I don't have to worry about it. I can just show up to the interview, whatever it was. And then I would get 15 people on a webinar, or we wouldn't have anyone listen within the first week of the podcast, even though we announced it on social media. So scheduling is important. Recognize what's going to work for you and what isn't. And so my biggest recommendation is, well, really two things. The first thing is, if you're in a fast-paced environment where you need to have that flexibility, only schedule out for the next month to 2 months. Like, don't go much further than that. I know it can feel really daunting. And so that leads into my second point, which is, if you want to kind of have an idea of what topics you'd like, what you can do is kind of put placeholders, if you will. And I'll use the example not of my podcast, but of our webinars that we do in our company, where I know that the first Wednesday of the month is Wellness Wednesday. I know that the third Wednesday of the month is our Creative Corner, where our marketing team comes and shares a quick little thing for all of our sales associates. So I have placeholders every week of the month to know this is in general what the theme is going to be. And then it helps me to figure out what guests would be really good to, bring on for the webinar. Same thing with the podcast. And that's actually the kind of system we switched to going into this year because it was so effective with webinars. And it allows us to have a little bit more efficiency when it comes to scheduling as well.
Good stuff. I appreciate that. I have a couple more questions. One of them has left me, so I'll ask the one that's in front of me. Like, you as a producer, you as a co-host, as a podcaster in general, like in the pre-interview, I remember you talking about a dance with your co-host. If you could kind of go into just how do you practice being a better podcaster or a co-host, and with that dance, just share with us some tips and some mindset, how you think about it, maybe your co-host thinks about it, just to be a better podcaster.
The dance. I love the dance. And so what I found within the first month of working with my co-host, who's really quickly becoming co-producer really of that podcast, is that it took us a little bit to kind of figure out a way to work together. And in hosting, it's a really easy snapshot of what that kind of dance looks like. And you can apply it to really all areas of podcasting, where we needed to be able to very quickly understand who's going to speak and when, who's going to ask what question and when. Now, we would prepare in advance, like we knew who was asking which question. But of course, as you know, Adam, in interviews, sometimes someone can say something and you have about 5 questions that would be really relevant to the listeners that you want to ask. And so the ability to read each other was very important. And so practicing by doing your work ahead of time, your pre-interview, preparing a script, if that's kind of what you need to get yourself going, talking about it in advance, has gotten us to the point where really it doesn't take us a whole lot of time to prepare for an episode anymore. We already know, what the guest is going to say for the most part. And so we prepare ahead of time. We do the pre-interview and then we're good to go. And it's really seamless. So that's what I mean by a dance that we do together. And it's something that takes time. And whatever part of the podcast process you're really passionate about, you can find that flow. You can find that dance that you're doing with you and whomever else is working with you. If you have the luxury of having a lot of, more people than just you on this endeavor. So finding people to dance with, if you will, and working together and practicing over and over and over again until it's just a seamless process would be a recommendation for really anyone out there listening.
All right, we're going to start to get ready for the end of the episode, but I do have three more awesome questions that I wanted to ask you. And the first one, it's kind of related to the dance that you mentioned. It just takes me back to this podcast that I ended up selling. I sold my first podcast. I had four offers, three of them over 50 grand. So, of course, I sold. And when we first started that podcast in the very beginning, we had three co hosts. Three co-hosts is a lot. Number one, three co-hosts is a lot. And in fact, I personally prefer not to have a co-host anymore because for me, by myself, it's easier not to make that extra person, the third wheel to dance. It's just easier to just have me and one, not two, just one host and one guest, right? And that's the way that I kind of find a way to pull the conversation exactly where I want it. I can see benefits of having other hosts, but I remember in the beginning we had three. After about 2 months, they started dropping off, by the way. I think it was just too awkward for us. We're stepping on each other's toes, if you will. But when it comes down to it, I was having a really hard time when I was a brand new podcaster, sounding authentic, feeling authentic, being authentic. I felt like I had to prove something. I felt like I had to be the best because I was now this podcaster, right? Now I'm this influencer. I can't have any mistakes or flaws or faults. I got to be perfect. And so, like, my voice was different. My voice was, okay, well, so this is what I'm thinking. And I just like having to try to sound so sophisticated. And, what's funny is like one of my other partners at the time, Manny, who was on that show, his was even worse. I mean, I hate to say that anyone could have been worse than me at the time because I was pretty bad, but his was even more awkward and more like obvious that he was really trying to be something that he wasn't. DJ at the time was totally fine. DJ was like himself. And I was so impressed with that. And I've been impressed with you, Erin, on this show today. The way that you're responding to questions is you're just being your natural self, right? You're being comfortable. You're not afraid to say something wrong, right? So I look at all these new podcasters that are like Manny and I were just stepping on each other's toes, not really sure what to say, what to ask. What are some things that have been helpful for you to be as genuine, as real of a person, like an authentic human being with flaws and pros and cons and just normal vocal patterns compared to those podcasters that are getting in and they think that they have to be something else?
Great question. It's funny, you asked that question and I was having trouble unmuting myself. So there's one thing. Mistakes happen, right? Like, let's just put it on the table. Mistakes happen all the time. And what I've found is I'm kind of like you. I will beat myself up mercilessly when I do something wrong. And what I found, it helps that I co-host a wellness podcast, right? I'm identifying these patterns in myself and recognize that I will be a recovering perfectionist for the rest of my life. And so finding ways to, I guess, intentionally point out to myself that I am imperfect and that is perfectly fine has been very helpful for me. And so one of the tips, for example, I'd recommend anyone, whatever microphone you use, XLR, USB, you all know what my preference would be. Find a way to have, what's it called, the in-ear monitoring. So finding a way to hear yourself speak as you're talking. It's a little bit awkward at first, but you get to hear your voice in real time as it sounds, not through the bones of your head and the skin of your face. Like you're hearing your voice. And that can help a lot, especially with the normal vocal patterns and how to sound authentic. The other thing I would recommend is get used to seeing yourself, especially if you're using something like Zoom, which I always recommend people do in an interview setting, because that way you can read the nonverbal cues as well as hear the inflection in someone's voice. And it allows you to respond a little bit better. The other thing, going back to practicing, practice, practice, practice. And I attribute a lot of how I communicate to the organization I work with, because that is a big part of being a new home sales professional with New Home Star, is that you are role playing constantly over and over and over again. You have to pass a rigorous final role play before you can even start selling. And it doesn't stop there, right? And so practicing over and over and over, look at yourself, listen to yourself, be willing to laugh at yourself. And that's why I really actually like having the co-hosts that I do, is because we recognize when we make mistakes. I also am the editor for our audio for the time being. And so I know what we need to cut out and things like that. And so we just laugh with each other and have that kind of pre-interview, not only to figure out what we're going to say, but also to make sure everyone feels comfortable and feels like themselves. And once we start to feel that, everyone's kind of loosening up, that's when we start our episode. And it allows us to just sound like how we would normally be when we're not in front of a microphone, when we're not in front of all these lights and cameras that we have for podcasting.
You mentioned doing a pre-interview, and I personally am a huge advocate for doing a pre-interview. I'm not a smart enough person to do a pre-interview like even days ahead of time or weeks or months, let alone. But so for me, I do my pre-interview at the beginning of every episode. You and I had a chat and I didn't know where we were going to take it. We just started asking a few questions, and then I was able to queue up. All right, Erin would crush it if I asked her, these 6 questions. So I wanted to ask you those 6 questions. Another thing for the listener, when you're doing your own podcast, you want to really have your guest be you want to really uplift your guest and let your guest shine. And so you're always trying to ask questions that the guest is comfortable with. You want to have a good relationship with the guest in the beginning. And I've actually canceled three or four total interviews where I just start to do the interview and I say, hey, I don't think it's going to be a fit. Like, we just don't jive. And I don't want to push it. I don't want to offend you, but I don't want to stress myself out at trying to interview you because, like, I'm stepping on your toes or you're stepping on my toes. So I don't even want to do this dance. Let's just go our separate ways right now. I'll just continue to be a wallflower or whatever. So I like that pre-interview. For me personally, I do it right at the time that the podcast is going to start. It usually takes me 5 to 15 minutes to do a pre-interview, to understand, to get those things queued up. And then we just start recording. And by the way, don't forget to push record. I've done that twice in 500, 600 episodes. And it's so embarrassing when you forget to push record. It's almost better to just start recording before you even get started and then just say 3, 2, 1. But anyway, Erin, do you do batch recording? Like, when you're recording, is there like one day per month that you'll record 5 or 6 episodes? Or is there like one day per week where you record 2 or 3 episodes? And so that you're getting it all done kind of with this blocked calendar? Or what's your process on interviewing people and then publishing the content?
That's a great question. One thing I'll say, it goes back to what you're talking about with the pre-interview. What's really great about the virtual world we live in now is you can mute your microphone. So it prevents you from stepping on someone's toes while you're trying to interview them. So I just wanted to throw that in there. You can cut this if it's not relevant. But the process that we use is a kind of batch process where it's one day a week for either podcast. What we do is we know that's when we're going to record. And so we leave it up to the interviewer, because oftentimes they're out in the field either selling homes or being a sales director, whatever it is. And so we need to be respectful of that schedule as well. So we use Calendly, which I would recommend this. They're not sponsoring this in any way, but beautiful, beautiful way to schedule those interviews. And so we know ahead of time when they're going to be. And then what we try to do is within the first month to month and a half of the season, prior to the season, so if we're in season 5 right now, we're trying to schedule season 6, all those recordings within the first, month and a half of season 5, if we can, right? My math might be a little bit off, but bear with me. So we do that batch process, and then it allows me, who's wearing a lot of hats and also doing a ton of stuff with the podcast, time to actually edit those podcasts. So that way they're ready to go and we don't have to scramble, or we eliminate as much scrambling as possible trying to get the edits out before it goes live.
Good stuff. Let's see. Batch recording content, pre-interview, authenticity. All right. So here's the last question that I definitely have for you. You mentioned a few times that you are the publisher of the podcast. You mentioned that you do all the post-production, the editing of the podcast. You know what to cut out, you know what not to cut out. And it kind of brings me to my team. We do some post-production for many other podcasters. And we have, our own, what would be the best way to say it, our own systems, strategies for our podcast. And then we have different podcasts that some of them want to leave the cuss words in, some of them want you to cut them out. For example, earlier today, I think I said a light cuss word, right? So what is your system when you're editing? What words do you cut out? Like filler words, such as okay, so, as well as cuss words, which ones are cut out, which ones are kept, or awkward silences like the time on this interview where you were trying to push unmute, but it just wouldn't press fast enough, right? Which of those things do you care about in your post-production process?
I care about all of them, really, because keep in mind, I have the added benefit where I work for the organization for whom these podcasts are being produced. And so I've worked with them for, at this point, almost 6 years. So I have a pretty good feel for what's going to be representing our organization well. And so also keep in mind that I am not a professional audio engineer. So that's point number one, right? So what I do is I try to remove as many filler words as possible. If it's really easy for me to cut it out without the recording sounding really, kind of jarring, chunky cuts, things like that, I try to remove as many as possible, as well as awkward silences. Swear words as well, just because, and this is more personal preference for me, but in a lot of professional business settings, it's not really socially acceptable to be swearing a lot. That doesn't mean people don't do it, but if I'm going into a boardroom with a whole bunch of executives, I'm not going to be swearing around them. And so what I would rather err on the side of caution. And so one of our co-hosts loved this person to death. This person can swear like a sailor without even intending to. And so what I have to do is coach this person and say, tone it down a little bit. And if this person does let out a few swear words here and there, I try to cut them as much as possible. But I also recognize, again, I'm not a professional audio engineer. If I can't cut it without it sounding good, then I'll leave it in and just fingers crossed no one takes offense to it. And if they do, we can we can handle that when we get there.
Good stuff. I would recommend to a podcaster when they're doing this, if you do let a swear word by, that for sure you at least go and mark that episode as explicit. So if you don't do that, you could get really in bad trouble. And actually, they could end up taking your whole show down without even having you be able to do anything about it. So all of your life's work, whether you have had 5 episodes and you're really excited about your show, or whether you've already done 500 or 600 episodes, you make a mistake, it's possible that you get unpublished and all of that work just kind of goes down the drain. So if you are going to let the cuss words in because you feel like that's being more authentic, that's fine if it's not a business setting or there's not a reason for you to cut them out. But make sure you at least mark that big capital E on the episode so that you're not going to get your whole show, all of your life's work kind of pulled down either. Erin, what is the best way for the listener to find you, follow you, or get a hold of you or the podcast?
Great question. Really, anywhere you listen to podcasts, we have a presence on. So you can check us out there, New Home Stars Real Estate Rockstars podcast, as well as the 15 Minutes of Wellness podcast. For me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to find me. I know there are a lot of
How do you find
Clarks.
Erin Clark on LinkedIn?
I know it's a pretty common name. So look for Erin Clark. And if you see someone who's working either in Washington State or Chicago, because again, my company is kind of across the board. And so take a look for that. The company I work for is New Home Star. So that's typically how you can find me. I'm trying to remember my LinkedIn name. It's escaping me
Whenever
right
you
now.
get a chance, you'll send it to me. And
Yeah,
for the listener, it won't matter to you what we're talking about now because look, it's already in the show notes. Just scroll down
exactly.
and her Instagram or her LinkedIn is already there. So we'll have the right link. Erin, you'll send it to me and it'll be there. Perfect. Thanks for coming on the show. I'm going to let you go. What I wanted to say to the listener is just get out there and do it. Start your podcast, launch your podcast, grow your podcast. Use the principles that Erin Clark was teaching you today. Follow her on other social media to kind of see what she's doing and how she's doing it. And if I can help you out in any way, you just go to growyourshow.com, and we'd be happy to partner up with you and help you have a really, really popular show where you feel good about it and you're publishing really good content and having great listenership. Erin, thanks for coming on. I'll let you go. Bye for now.
Bye.
If you're glad that you checked out the podcast today, if you got some value out of this episode, some actionable takeaways, I invite you to do one of three things. A, you could do a written review on Apple. Let us know what you think. Just an honest written review. B, you could share the podcast with a friend of yours who needs it. Or C, at the very least, implement what you've learned to take your business and your podcast to the next level. And I'll see you on the next episode.